Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, of course, I thought that I would give my little fight preview, my fight analysis, and my final fight prediction of the big fight, or somewhat of a big fight, that's going to be happening this weekend between that of debatably, of course, the number one boxer throughout the planet, Mr. Terence Crawford, who of course is going to challenge himself at his fourth official weight class. And of course, this is going to be over the Uzbekian fighter, I believe, Mr. Israil Madrimov. And of course, for those of you that do not know, this I believe is going to be for the WBA light middleweight title at 154 pounds. So of course, once again, if Terence Crawford ends up being successful in this fight here, he will end up being a four-weight division champion. Now, where is he going to go from here if he ends up defeating that of Mr. Israil Madrimov? We'll see. Of course, a lot of people have kind of talked about him debatably, unifying the 154-pound weight class. Of course, others have talked about him potentially fighting that of Canelo Alvarez. Personally, I really don't mind either avenue, but we'll talk about that as the video goes along. But first of all, I do apologize for not posting as many videos as possible. The connection overall has been a little bit more finicky as of lately. And on top of that, overall, there's been other stuff to do. But I will post more videos, especially within these next upcoming weeks. So I do apologize overall to the people on my channel waiting patiently for videos. But anyways, let's now get into the breakdown and who I believe is going to win this fight. And let me also state this, because depending on the boxing channel that you may watch, or depending overall on who may be a fan of Terence Crawford or who may be against that of Terence Crawford, certain people are trying to put this fight in a light to where I think it's a little bit unrealistic. Now, in my view, this fight is a very decent fight, and I think that it's a relatively good challenge for Terence Crawford. But that being stated, if you watch a channel like that of a Dante's Boxing Nation, or maybe another LDBC or New Media channel, what they'll try to tell you is that Israil Madrimov, that he reminds them a lot of Gennady Triple G Golovkin. It's just that he doesn't have the profile of a Gennady Golovkin to be quite as popular, and no, that's not really the case. Israil Madrimov is a very decent fighter, but let's also keep this in relative and realistic context that Israil Madrimov only has about 11 total fights on his resume. It just is what it is. And one of those fights, I believe, not too long ago was scored a draw. Although I believe that that fight went to the early scorecards because of a headbutt or a stoppage or something like that. But anyways, point is that many people, especially who are trying to push the fact that Terence Crawford, that he's clearly the best of this generation, and you could debate that. You could have a great debate that Terence Crawford is the best fighter of this generation. But many people who, of course, are trying to push that, they want to make it seem like Israil Madrimov is the next Gennady Golovkin. And not overall, once again, just to push his number one pound-for-pound ranking, but also to compare him to a fighter that also has a great debate as the best fighter or the greatest fighter of this generation, Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez. And when you talk about the fighters that are debatably the greatest of this generation, when you talk about the past 10 years, in my view, you're talking about three fighters. You're talking about Terence Crawford, you're talking about Alexander Usyk, and you're talking about Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez. Naoya Inoue, of course, could debatably maybe be within that conversation, but I think that he's a little bit younger than those guys, and on top of that, he still has to prove a little bit more against people like Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez and some other great challenges as well, at least to be remembered as the official best of his generation. But we'll see overall what ends up happening. He might actually be remembered as the best of the next generation, but we'll see. But these three fighters, with Crawford, Usyk, and Canelo Alvarez, in my personal view, they have stood above basically the rest of their contemporaries, whether it be Vasily Lomachenko, whether it be Teofimo Lopez or Devin Haney, or whether it be some of the other potential contemporaries that were within that of the past. These three fighters, in my view, have stood the test of time compared to everybody else. So the question will be about this era, who is the definitive best fighter of this era? We may never potentially get an answer, but the thing that I will state is this. Terence Crawford, in my view, if he is going to be remembered as the best of this era, the first step that he's going to have to take is that he is going to have to win this fight. Because once again, a lot of people, they're trying to put this into the category overall of, oh, we don't know who's going to win this fight. This is a 50-50 level fight. This is not a 50-50 level fight. And I understand overall that a certain amount of people are trying to put it into that category. It is not a 50-50 level fight. And Israil Madrimov, in my view, he's a decent boxer, but he's not a guy that, in my view, that when I take a look at him, I just think that everything jumps off the page. When I take a look at this fight, just in my personal view. There really isn't anything that Israil Madrimov beats Terence Bud Crawford in my personal view, other than maybe punching power and about girth and weight. That's, to be honest with you, that's really about it. I don't think that he beats him in any other category, at least if Terence Bud Crawford comes at his best. I don't think that he's going to beat him in boxing IQ. I don't think he's going to beat him in foot speed, nor foot movement, nor hand speed. I don't think overall that he's going to beat him in counter-punching ability. And even punching power is going to be questionable because Terence Bud Crawford, of course, we all know that he's with the snack program. But on top of that, we all know that Terence Bud Crawford is a very, very, very heavy puncher. And apparently he gained a little bit of weight overall once again for this fight as well. So we'll see overall what potentially ends up happening here. But it is going to be very, very particularly interesting. That being stated, what type of fight do I expect from both of these fighters? I expect, perhaps, if it is going to be competitive, I expect maybe a fight that's going to be competitive maybe for the first 2 to 3 rounds. A lot of people, of course, have compared Israil Madrimov to that of Aegis Kavaliauskas. In my view, he's more comparable to an Aegis Kavaliauskas, really, than more what he was a Gennady Golovkin. Because Gennady Golovkin and Israil Madrimov, in my view, the only things that they really have in common is that they're both pressure fighters and they look a little bit similar in the face. And of course, both of them had, great amateur pedigrees. But just because overall someone has a great amateur pedigree or a great Olympic background doesn't always necessarily mean that they're going to be super successful in terms of that of the professional boxing scene. And many of these channels, once again, what they'll like to do is that they'll like to bring up an Olympian, when it suits them. But then when it doesn't suit them, all of a sudden they don't want to bring up the Olympic background of a fighter that may potentially get beat. So once again, we have to keep the same standards across the board. And do I believe that Israil Madrimov is a Gennady Golovkin type of fighter? No, I do not. Gennady Golovkin at one point in time was looked at as a potential top 5 pound-per-pound fighter. And in my view, very rightly so. Gennady Golovkin not only was a very intelligent fighter, but in my view, he had more of a multitude of ways of fighting, not necessarily in a complete great way like maybe a Floyd Mayweather or maybe some of the other great fighters that we've seen in the past, like a Crawford or maybe even a Canelo, as great as them. But at the end of the day, Gennady Golovkin could fight somewhat within a multitude of ways. He had punching power that could pretty much end the fight with one punch within either hand. And on top of that, he was rightly sized for his division and a guy that was extremely accomplished for his weight class. Once again, Israil Madrimov is a guy that has only 11 total fights on his record. We don't know how good this guy actually is. He has never been in the ring with an official A-grade level fighter. That's just the truth of the matter. And Crawford fans, they can get mad at that all they want to. At the end of the day, that doesn't mean that Israil Madrimov is a bum by any means. But at the end of the day, let's not try to compare this guy to a Gennady Golovkin, because at the end of the day, he is not a Gennady Golovkin. He's just not. All right, it is what it is. But that being stated, once again, what do I believe is going to happen? I believe that it's possible that it may be competitive for the first couple of rounds, but I think that Terence Bud Crawford is going to be too quick, at least if the age and if the time and the layoff does not get to him. I believe that Terence Bud Crawford is just going to be too good of a fighter. I believe that he's going to be too sharp. I believe that he's going to be too keen of a fighter. I think that his arm reach is going to be a severe factor. And I know that a lot of people, of course, are talking about the girth and the weight of Israil Madrimov. Well, at the end of the day, once again, as I've already explained in the past, it's pretty much going to be even out because Terence Bud Crawford pretty much is a natural welterweight fighter at this point. He really has been, for the past several years. Even at 140 pounds, he was rehydrating at 160 pounds plus. So Terence Crawford has really been a natural welterweight for years. He is the perfect height for a welterweight at about 5'8", and he has an exceptionally long arm reach, when it comes to that of 74 inches. So he really has the arm reach of a middleweight fighter, at the very least. So once again, any weight, in my view, that Israil Madrimov is going to have over Terence Crawford, as long as the layoff and as long as the age, because Crawford is turning 37 very soon, I believe in September, as long as the age and as long as the layoff does not really play that of a severe factor in my personal view, I just think that the arm reach and the speed of Terence Bud Crawford, I think it's going to be way more of a factor than any of the weight and the girth that Israil Madrimov might have. Because it would be different if Terence Bud Crawford, in my view, was more of a Devin Haney or a Shakur Stevenson, and if he didn't have elite level power. Crawford is looked at as a guy overall that has debatably, for any of the champions in the world, some of the most devastating counter punches and punching power overall within all the boxing scene. Now, I'm not sure if he would be ranked number 1, but Crawford overall would be up there. He had all stoppages at the welterweight division. Now, yes, the majority of those stoppages over fighters that, in my view, were either B or C grade level fighters or fighters that probably were washed up like a Kell Brook or an Amir Khan. but he also was able to stop that of Sean Porter and an Errol Spence Jr., in my personal view, when they were still looked at as having an A-grade level career at that point in time. So Crawford very clearly is a very highly intelligent counterpuncher. He can fight within a multitude of ways. He can fight on the front foot. He can fight on the back foot. And I do wonder, with Israil Madrimov having a 6-inch reach disadvantage over that of Terence Bud Crawford, I do wonder how it is going to be a factor. Because when I take a look at Israil Madrimov, he usually either does one of two things. He's going to come in with a high guard and try to jab to the body, or he's going to try and make sure to get around the lead hand, which of course can be a very valuable asset. But once again, I don't think that Israil Madrimov beats Terence Bud Crawford in any category other than possible punching power just because of the size. And on top of that, once again, his weight. That's really about it. There's really nothing else that he beats him in. He doesn't beat him in foot movement. He doesn't beat him in hand speed. He doesn't beat him in head movement. He doesn't beat him in defense. And Crawford has not always been the most elite defensive fighter, but in his last fight against Spence, he showed to be very elite, defensively against Spence. Now, is that more the style of Spence, or was it more just because Crawford had the biggest performance of his career and he showed up to the level of his competition? Well, we'll see. We don't know. But, once again, I don't believe that Israil Madrimov is going to be very successful as the rounds go along. I think that Crawford is going to be able to hit him with his jab a multitude of times. The one punch that I will say that Crawford should watch out for with Israil Madrimov is going to be that overhand right that he's going to try to land. Israil Madrimov loves to try to set that up overall. Once again, he loops that right hand over the top. But I do expect Terence Bud Crawford more than likely to expect that and to counter that. We'll see overall how he reacts to it. But it is going to be interesting because Madrimov is going to have a little bit of weight on him that Crawford is not used to. And on top of that, overall, he does have a little bit of punching power. But in order for Israil Madrimov, in my personal view, in order for him to be successful, he's going to have to pressure Terence Bud Crawford, and he's going to have to get in there. And he's going to have to really try to take risks, and he's going to have to try to find a way around Terence Bud Crawford's jab without potentially getting knocked on his ass or possibly knocked out with a good counterpunch in return. Do I personally see that happening? No, I do not. At least not Israil Madrimov winning the fight. Now, once again, I think that there's the potentiality for him overall to have a little bit of success in the early rounds because Crawford, a lot like Mayweather or some of the other great fighters or Canelo, they take, a couple of rounds to kind of download the data, as certain people would say, and kind of see what your potential style may be and what you may bring to the table. But other than that, I see Terence Bud Crawford pretty much dominating this fight. And it's important, once again, to put all the things that I did in context because Dante's Boxing Nation and a certain amount of these other guys, what they're going to try to do is that they're going to try to compare this fight, for example, to what Canelo did with Dimitri Bivol or what a Mikey Garcia did with the Spence or what other certain guys did with that. And it's really not like that. Because when you talk about those guys that fought those fighters, they were about 2 weight classes separated. Terence Bud Crawford is only 1 weight class separated from this guy. And this is pretty much evened out once again because Madrimov is going to have a 6-inch reach disadvantage. So it's not even like he has only a few inches of reach of a disadvantage. He only has a 68-inch reach. So once again, this is pretty much a fight to where Terence Crawford is supposed to look dominant in my personal view. He might have some problems, but my personal prediction, what do I personally predict? If Crawford is the same fighter as what I seen in the Errol Spence Jr. fight, even a little bit with his age and a layoff, I expect Terence Bud Crawford to get a knockout anywhere from round 7 to round 9. That's personally what I expect Terence Bud Crawford to do. I think that Israil Madrimov is not the greatest defensive fighter that I've ever seen. I don't think overall that he's going to move around enough. I don't think that he has the hand speed nor the foot speed. And I don't really know how well he's going to handle the footwork and the foot movement of Terence Bud Crawford and the amount of angles and different looks that Terence Bud Crawford is going to give to him. Terence Bud Crawford is debatably the best boxer on the planet and the best fighter in the world, at least when you talk about the sport and the world of boxing. I just don't know if I trust Israil Madrimov to really get around there intelligently enough overall to really get at Terence Crawford. And I think that it would be a little bit different if Israil Madrimov did maybe have Gennady Golovkin type of power or maybe had a few more inches of reach, even if he had a 71-inch reach like a Canelo Alvarez. But I just don't think that he has that. And when you talk about Canelo Alvarez, for example, if that fight does end up happening, there's many other qualities, in my view, that Canelo Alvarez can do in order to more even that fight out or in order for Canelo to get the advantage. Canelo is an excellent defensive fighter and he has excellent head movement. Canelo also has excellent punching power that really could put Terence Bud Crawford in a bind. Israil Madrimov, in my view, he's going to have very good power, but I don't think it's going to be enough because I think that Crawford's speed and I think that his power is going to match up pretty well with Israil Madrimov. And on top of that, once again, he may have a very good amateur pedigree, but you're talking about a fighter that may potentially be the best fighter in the planet or on the planet right now in the sport of boxing. So once again, at the end of the day, I just don't see Madrimov lasting past anywhere from 7 to 8 to 9 rounds. I think that Crawford is eventually going to get at him. I think that eventually Crawford is going to stop him. And I think that this should more than likely be a relatively dominant performance from Terence Bud Crawford. And it should be. Now, don't get it twisted. Should there maybe be some rounds that are a little bit competitive? Absolutely. But once again, this needs to be stated. This is a fight where Terence Bud Crawford is really supposed to dominate this fight. This is not a fight where this should be an all-out brawl. This is not a fight overall to where Terence Bud Crawford should be losing 4 to 5 rounds. It is not one of those fights. All right? It is not one of those fights. So once again, Dante, for example, and some of these other guys, they're trying to put this in this context to where this is this Canelo versus Gennady Golovkin type of fight. It is not one of those fights whatsoever. They're trying to make you believe that because they're trying to make the case even stronger for Crawford that he is the greatest fighter of this generation. And let me tell you what, he very debatably is. Terence Bud Crawford very debatably is the greatest fighter of this generation. I think he's right there with Canelo Alvarez and Alexander Usyk. But the reason why Dante and a lot of these other guys are trying to put this fight into this light is because they're very racially motivated. And on top of that, when it comes down to it, when they're racially motivated, they're going to do anything possible with their politics and their narratives to make it seem like Terence Bud Crawford is defeating a great opponent after a great opponent. And like I've already stated, Terence Bud Crawford is an all-time great fighter, but he does not have this Canelo Alvarez or Floyd Mayweather or Manny Pacquiao type of resume. He never has. It is what it is. And I understand overall that a lot of people are going to get mad at that, but that's just a plain, cold, harsh truth of it. Crawford does not have an all-time great resume. He's gotten a better resume, especially ever since he defeated Sean Porter and that of Errol Spence Jr. His resume definitely looks better, especially ever since he was able to stop those guys. But he does not have the same amount of names on his list as what a Pacquiao or what a Mayweather or what a Canelo Alvarez does. He just doesn't. And that's why if Terence Bud Crawford, if he does end up losing this fight, it is not going to look very good for his career because in my view, this is a very winnable fight for Crawford. It's a little bit challenging, but it's not as challenging as what people are really trying to let on. Like I said, many people, within their videos, they're saying, wow, take a look at how big Israil Madrimov is. But if you notice throughout any of their videos, they can't tell you one thing that Israil Madrimov does better than Crawford. They can't tell you one thing. They can't tell you one thing that he does better than Terence Bud Crawford. You have all these people taking a look at his size and his girth and all this other stuff. And listen, that's great, but that's not going to win you the fight over Terence Bud Crawford. Not unless you have the skills to pay the bills. Now, maybe if this was a Janabek or something like that, I'd be a little bit more worried because personally, I think Janabek is a better fighter. Now once again, if you want to compare, overall a Terence Bud Crawford fight to when Canelo fought Dmitry Bivol or, when Rigondeaux fought Lomachenko or, overall when Lomachenko fought Haney or when some other guys fought those guys, really how that would be comparable is if Terence Bud Crawford fought someone like a Janabek at 160 pounds. That would probably really be the way that it would be comparable. Or if Crawford fought that at Canelo Alvarez, that really would be the only way that it would be comparable. That overall would be the super fights overall that Crawford to where they would be. If he fought Janabek, that would be the fight overall to where if Crawford won that fight, that would really say something about his legacy because that's a fighter that, in my view, is a multi-dimensional fighter and someone that is super dangerous. Madrimov, I believe, is, Madrimov. He's a relatively dangerous fighter, but he's not as dangerous as what some of these channels are trying to let on. He's a very good fighter, but at the end of the day, he is a fighter that only has 11 total fights. He is not super quick. He is not a guy that, in my view, is excessively defensively responsible. And I think Crawford combined with the height and the reach, and I believe also, with his experience and just his multitudes of ways of fighting, the variety that he has in his style, I just don't see Madrimov lasting throughout this fight. I just don't. I think that he's going to get knocked out, and I think that he's going to get hurt, and that's personally the fight that I see. But we'll see. I expect Terence Bud Crawford to have the better jab. I expect him to move a lot throughout this fight, to move on the back foot and catch Israil Madrimov overall throughout the fight. And I expect Israil Madrimov eventually to back up and Terence Bud Crawford to stop that of Israil Madrimov. Because if Madrimov is going to win this fight, he cannot box Terence Bud Crawford in the mid-range nor in the long range or on the back foot. And that's another concern that I would have. I'm not quite sure if Israil Madrimov really has the ability, in my personal view, overall to really beat Crawford on the back foot if he has to, or in the mid-range. In my personal view, there's only one range that Madrimov is going to be able to beat Crawford in, and that's going to be pedal to the metal and completely pushing the gas and trying to hurt Terence Crawford to the best of his ability. And even if he does that, I'm not really super confident that he can do much because of the reach disadvantage that he has. And on top of that, once again, I just think that he's too slow. I think that he's too slow, and I think that some of his punches are a little bit too wide and a little bit too advertised. I don't think personally that, once again, that this is any more than an 80-20 fight, to be quite honest with you. But that's just my personal view. We'll see what happens. But like I said, this is a decent win in my view. I might be able to give it an A-, anywhere from an A- to a B+. But once again, I don't think that Israil Madrimov, I don't think that he's a bum, but I also don't think that he's this Gennady Golovkin type of figure either. So there has to be a balance with it. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today with my fight prediction. I predict Terence Crawford to get the knockout within about 9 rounds, 8 or 9 rounds. That's personally my prediction. I think he's going to be way too quick unless the age clearly has got to him, in which, of course, I will comment about if I see that. But I believe that he's just going to be way too smart, way too maneuverable. I believe that the reach is going to be more of a problem than really what Madrimov's weight is going to be. I just think that Terence Crawford is going to be too smart, too good, too complete of a fighter. And I think overall that Israil Madrimov, that he really only has one way of beating Terence Crawford. And I don't think that is going to go well, but we'll see what happens. But anyways, that pretty much is my prediction for this fight. We'll see what ends up happening, but it's going to be very interesting. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think on this fight. And of course, there's other great fights that are happening on this, but not quite. This card, to be quite honest with you, even though it looks good on paper, once Tim Tszyu and Vergil Ortiz pretty much was off the card, that pretty much was the end of the 50-50 level fights on this card. Because when you take a look at the rest of these fights, they're good little fights, but, there's pretty much clear expected winners all across the board. Crawford is clearly expected to beat Israil Madrimov. Isaac Pitbull Cruz is clearly expected to beat Jose Valenzuela, I believe is his name, and Andrew Ruiz is expected to beat Jarrell fat-ass Big Baby Miller. So, even though this card, is relatively decent, it's not really quite as competitive as what a lot of people are really trying to make it out to be. Really the theme of these fights is fights that are disguised as 50-50 level fights, but are really more like 70-30 fights. But it is what it is. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I predict Terence Crawford to win, as well as Isaac Pitbull Cruz and Andrew Ruiz Jr. as well. And I forgot some of the other fights that are happening on this card. Andy Cruz, apparently that one Cuban fighter, is on the fight card as well. So we'll see where he goes. David Morrell, I believe, as well. So we'll see what happens. This is definitely a good card. But I expect Terence Crawford to have a dominant performance, as he should. And once again, if Crawford ends up losing this fight, his legacy, unless once again I see him and he just looks completely washed up, because it's possible he's been off for a year, and on top of that, he's going to turn 37 very soon. Unless I see that, if he ends up losing this fight, we are going to have to talk a little bit about Crawford's legacy. Not meaning that he's still not a great fighter, but at the end of the day, when we talk about who debatably is the best of this generation, Crawford's name may have to be crossed off the list if he ends up losing this fight. Because that is going to have to be talked about, because Madrimov is not a Gennady Golovkin. It just is what it is. This is a fight to where Crawford should be able to stop this opponent. But we'll see what happens. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.